1923, Germany, The Merchant of Venice, Shylock. Ugh. Now, we have to remember that 1923 Weimar Republic is not the same thing as 1933 or 1943 Nazi regime. So we don't necessarily have to expect a super racist portrayal of Shylock. But, I mean, yeah, I was a little apprehensive going into it, for sure. And yes, they do lean into certain negative Jewish stereotypes, which is unfortunate. One of the things I noticed was that all the Jews look very kind of scruffy and dirty. So not a great look there. But on the whole, it was not a terrible portrayal, and definitely the character of Shylock had pathos. There were instances in which he was very sympathetic. And as far as the movie goes itself, the film was shot on location in Venice, which is probably the coolest thing about it. And it just looks beautiful. It makes good use of the Venice scenery. It makes good use of Venice interior spaces as well. The courtroom scene in particular looks very grandiose. There's a lot of extras. It's in this beautiful location. There's, of course, a lot of tension as well, so it's just a good overall scene. Now, my understanding is that the German version has actually been lost, but there is a shorter American release that's available, and it, for some reason, changed all of the names. It changed the title to The Jew of Mestre. It changed all the characters' names as well, back to a 14th century version of the story by an Italian author that Shakespeare did base his Merchant of Venice on. The film doesn't actually follow that story all that well, and it doesn't follow the Merchant of Venice all that well either, so it's sort of doing its own thing. For one thing, it completely cuts out the 3 boxes that the suitors are supposed to come and choose between to win Portia's hand. It does keep in most all of the key plot elements, though. One person I really liked was the girl playing Jessica. And by the way, I'm just going to use all of the original Merchant of Venice character names, not the American release names. So I really liked the character of Jessica. I thought she did a very good job. I thought she was very believable. She did not look scruffy and dirty, by the way, even though she was a Jewish character. Now, in this silent film, there's a lot more time devoted to setting up the story. So actually, the place where Shakespeare starts the story doesn't begin until much later into the film. So there's a lot of kind of new elements that the film brings in that obviously aren't in the original. So one thing is that Jessica is about to be betrothed to a Jewish man named Elias. And I really liked him, actually. I was very struck by his performance. He seemed genuinely in love with her, and therefore genuinely pained and uncomfortable with the fact that she was being forced to marry him against her will, because of course she's actually in love with the Christian boy Lorenzo. And I thought he just did a very good job of portraying that. He seemed like a good guy, just in a really sucky situation, and maybe secretly hoping that she would kind of come around to him and they'd get married and be happy forever. But of course that doesn't happen. She runs off with Lorenzo. He's so distraught by this that he actually drowns himself after bringing Shylock the news. So he's just this very kind of tragic character that has nothing to do with the Shakespeare version, but I thought was a perfectly fine addition to the silent version, which is doing its own thing anyways. A couple things I didn't like so much was actually the character of Bassanio. Now in Shakespeare's version, he is kind of, a party boy, gambler, that kind of a person. But you can see how he's attractive. He's still got a certain charm about him. He speaks very well, he's romantic, all that sort of thing. But in this silent film version, he really just comes off as like a childish buffoon with not a whole lot going for him, because he doesn't have any money. He's not particularly charming. He's just kind of immature. So that was weird to me. I just didn't see Portia and him having much chemistry. Who knows why an intelligent, wealthy woman would fall for this guy. It just didn't really make sense. Another thing I didn't love was, like I say, the courtroom scene was pretty good. I thought that was handled well. But after that, the tone totally switches into just kind of straightforward comedy, which I thought was strange. It just didn't seem to quite fit with the whole rest of the movie, which leaned more towards drama. There's obviously comedic elements in the play, which is why it's one of Shakespeare's problem plays, because it's like, oh, which category does it go in? But certainly the way the silent film does it, it kind of eliminates a lot of those comedic elements with the suitors, and it doesn't bring in the comedy until the very end, which is like, oh, whoa, okay, where is that coming from? So I don't think that worked, and it wasn't particularly funny anyways. So just as a total side note, for people who are big fans of Nosferatu, the famous German silent film about the vampire Nosferatu, Max Schreck, who plays the vampire, is in this movie. He plays a very small role, actually 2 small roles. He's one of a group of Italian students, and then he also plays the Doge at the very end. Now, I'm sure what you'd be most curious about, or at least what I was most curious about, is yes, this was back in 1923, so the Nazis had not taken over yet, but of course they were about to in 10 years, and a lot of these actors were still alive at the time, so what were they up to? I'm not going to go into each and every actor. There's a couple people that were very much against, a few people actually that were very much against the Nazi regime. One was the woman playing Portia, Henny Porten. She was a very popular actress at the time, and she actually married a Jewish doctor. And when the Nazis took over, she refused to divorce her husband. That, of course, hurt her career a lot. But she was popular enough with the public that she was denied leaving the country. So she did stay in the country, and she did make a few more films during that period. Someone else who was able to leave the country is the man playing Antonio. He actually became famous for being an opera director. And he left the country when the Nazis took over because he was having none of that. And then later after the war, he was actually the one who started the opera department at USC, University of Southern California. But now for someone on the other side. Ironically, that person happens to be none other than Werner Krauss, who plays Shylock. He was actually known for playing a lot of Jewish characters, or caricatures, as one could say, but not always really negatively, at least in his earlier years, in his earlier acting career. Obviously, this one, again, it leans into some stereotypes for sure, but it's sympathetic. For one thing, they bring a lot of elements into Shylock's story that aren't in the original Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare, that I actually think lend even more sympathy to the character of Shylock. For one thing, we're introduced to his wife in the beginning, and she ends up going to Antonio and a group of his friends to try and collect a debt, and they're all kind of laughing at her, and they're not taking her seriously, and she gets angry with them, and she ends up having a heart attack, and she dies. So Shylock is understandably very upset by this, and it's really an emotional scene where he comes to his wife, who's just lying dead in the streets there, and he picks her up and he's carrying her, and it's very sad, and you definitely feel sorry for the guy. And the Christians, who are supposed to be Christians, Antonio and his friends, are standing there just kind of laughing at the whole scene. You're like, what the heck? So it doesn't make, the movie doesn't always make the Christians look very good. The Christians are kind of, ne'er-do-well partygoers that are they just want to laugh at everything and not take things seriously. And then they also really highlight how drastic it is that Jessica ends up marrying a Christian, because to her father, to Shylock, and to that community, she would now be dead. She was considered dead. And so they really heightened the emotion from that. And Shylock is really distraught by this. There's genuine pain and torture on his face when he is confronted with that reality that she has essentially died, even though she's technically still alive. So all of that comes together to make a very complex individual who, yes, he's bloodthirsty and he's very menacing in the courtroom scene and everything, and he looks dirty and all of that. Yes, all of that's true, but there are pretty good reasons for why he has this vengeful spirit in him. We feel bad for him. So that's that portrayal by Werner Krauss. He also played a character called Nathan the Wise in a movie called Nathan the Wise just a year prior. And that Jewish character is actually even more sympathetic. He's this noble, heroic figure from the Crusades who's very, very intelligent, very wise, very good and generous and kind and all of those things. And that film, Nathan the Wise, was actually so pro-Jewish that it sparked protests in Germany, and it was actually the first film to be banned by the Nazis. So looking at those early films from the 1920s, you'd think like, oh, well, he, sure, he's got his issues or whatever, but he's certainly not against the Jews. He certainly wouldn't be for the Nazi ideology, right? Well, no, he was. He was very much an anti-Semite. He was very much on the side of the Nazis. He was a state actor and a cultural ambassador for Nazi Germany, so he was very much in the thick of all of that during the Third Reich. And there's a famous Nazi propaganda film called Jude Süß, which was made in 1940, and it's just kind of outrageously racist. And he pretty much plays all of the characters that are Jewish except for the main guy. And again, it's just very kind of disgustingly racist. It's pure Nazi propaganda. He also played Shylock again in 1943 at Vienna's Burg Theater. And this is probably the most infamous production of The Merchant of Venice. Again, very racist. From all the descriptions that I've read, it is not the performance that I watched in this film. It's quite different and played comedically in a very unsavory way. This Shylock was meant to be just kind of repulsive to the audience, and just Werner Krauss just played up all of the worst possible stereotypes. So that's Werner Krauss. He's a good actor, and so he had talent for sure, but he did not use that talent in a good way to better humanity. And that is a shame when very talented people do that. So if for nothing else, I do recommend the movie for the Venetian scenery, all the beautiful interiors, and then obviously the exterior shots of the canals, and there's big crowd scenes, very grandiose silent film style if you like that sort of thing. The costumes are really beautiful as well. Now, if the actor Werner Krauss makes you a little uncomfortable, I don't blame you, he makes me uncomfortable as well. But it is a decent portrayal of Shylock, and again, not an unsympathetic one. If you'd like to read more of my thoughts on this subject of Werner Krauss and anti-Semitism, Nazi theater, kind of all that was going on at that time as it relates to The Merchant of Venice, definitely check out my blog post, and you can find that at wondrouswell.wordpress.com. All right, and that's it for this Shakespeare film review. Anon.